Now that we've signed in, we need to create a workspace. A workspace is a logical grouping of repositories as they relate to the teams that work on them. In almost all cases, you only need one workspace and all of your repositories can live there. For this example, we're just going to create one called the Swim Demo Video Workspace. Once it's created, you'll be greeted with a brand new empty workspace. Up top, you can see the current version number of Swim and also invite functionality to invite other people in your team to this workspace. We'll explore that later. To the left, you see the workspace menu where you can modify the workspace, sign out, or create a new workspace. Now it's time to add a repository. If you're not ready to do that and you just want to try out Swim's editor in a sandbox environment, you can click here to create a new document. From there, you can exercise all of Swim's editor functionality and save it as a draft in case you want to save it when you add a repository later. Right now, we're going to go ahead and add one for real though, so that we can continue. To do that, we click Add a Repository. And this is bringing up repositories from both the organization and my personal account. And the one that I have staged here is called Hello Swim in my personal account. So I search for that, add it, and connect it. Next, you'll see that I need to go ahead and initialize Swim. It's going to create a branch for me called Initializing Swim, which I'll later merge. Now, just to show you a comparison, I'm going to add a production repository that has documentation already associated with it. So to do that, I'll click plus the repo. And I'll bring this in, which is the live repository for Swim's documentation site that's built on Docusaurus. So now, since this repository was already initialized, Swim is sitting there on the master branch. And we can see that in certain places, we have light gray file names and folders, and in other places, they're darker. The darker file names indicate that documentation is associated with them. Whereas if I go to the Hello Swim, we can see that we're still on the Initializing Swim branch, and there's no documentation associated with it. So back on the Hello Swim branch, we're going to go ahead and create a document. And for demonstration purposes, this document will just consist of the minimum configuration things that you should know about if you're going to run this instance. So to create, we'll just click the plus sign next to a doc, and we will type. And then we're down here to text where we can just start typing. Before we get too far into this, I want to bring your attention to the / menu, which brings up a variety of tools. You can either insert a snippet from your code, which we'll do in just a moment. You can reference a path in a repository, and that can be to a directory or to a file. And if that path ever changes in the future, Swim will automatically sync it. You can insert an image and reposition or move it around. You can enter a raw markdown mode where you can paste markdown text that you may have, or you can look at the text that you have in the text area without any formatting applied. You can link to another Swim document from within here. And you can also just add another text section if you need to. For now, we're going to get started and we're just going to start typing. And we'll add a snippet here. And this is going to bring in the main configuration with the little bit of stuff that we have here that we need to bring their attention to. And we'll add that to our document. And I also want to bring in the sidebar code here, which doesn't necessarily require any kind of modification. People just need to know that it exists and what it's for. We're going to add this to the document. Within the Snippet Studio here, you can see that I have a tab open for each of the files that I'm referencing in the documentation. This can be really handy if you have a bunch of style sheets and a bunch of models and a bunch of controllers and other things that where you have to explain the path between them. So we're done for now. You can also search here if you need to search for a certain part of your code in order to be able to find it. So we're good for now. I'm going to go ahead and close the Snippet Studio. And we've got our code here. So in this snippet, we're just going to say we need to customize the. Now watch what I do with this. I'm going to open up a backtick because I want to reference part of the code in here. I want to reference that title field. So I open up a backtick and I start typing, and you can see Swim found exactly the thing that I wanted to reference. And also, I think I need to talk about the base URL. And that is correct here too. You might also want to look at, here we're going to add a path to another configuration that we just want people to be aware of. And you can see that that's now valid and has not changed, and these have not changed. If these get changed later, AutoSync will attempt to compensate for it and alert you to it. Otherwise, if they disappear entirely, you'll have to reselect that. So we're good with that snippet for now. And in this one, you know what? Let's make that a link. I'm just going to shift and backspace over it and bring up a really neat WYSIWYG editor here so that I can format this link correctly. And I'm going to accept that. And you can see there, it is now a link. That's handy in any occasion where you need to apply formatting or whatever. And like I said before, if you need to view the markdown that you're looking at without any formatting, you can just type this and it'll open a dialog where you can just see the raw format. So we're good for there. So at this point, we have, as far as demonstration purposes are concerned, a pretty comprehensive document. And we're going to go ahead and commit that to the initializing swim branch that we did earlier. And now when we look at our Hello Swim repository, we can see that these are lit up because they now have documentation associated with them. So let's go back to the repository that I've previously documented so that you don't have to sit here and watch me type out an entire thing. I'll click on this, go back to docs.swim.io, and you see here in the workspace, I have something here called a playlist. A playlist is a list of things that you want someone to consume in a prescribed order. They can be swim docs, they could be markdown files, videos, or images and charts, or whatever else you want that would make sense for you. And we'll click on this just to see what it is. This particular one is designed to onboard someone into how this code base works. And not only as a developer, but also people from a marketing team that would need to be able to update the site. So in order to edit these, or while you're editing them, you just click the plus sign in the area where you want to add the part of it. And you will bring up a menu where you can add a new swim doc. You could add an external link, like I said, a YouTube video or any other external link that you would need. You can also add a link to a markdown file directly that is contained within the root of your repository. Just remember that the URL here, or the path, would be relative to the repo root. Sometimes you want to be able to make a playlist that spans multiple repositories. For instance, if you had to illustrate a flow of code that spanned between several services, you would want to be able to do that. If you want to create one that spans multiple repositories, let's go back to the workspace. Currently, we're in a repository view. Let's go back to our workspace view, and you can add a workspace playlist. And a workspace playlist works like a regular playlist, with the caveat that it allows me to select between repositories here. So I want to, let's just say, for instance, this one, I don't have any playlists in this one, but I do have a doc. So I'm going to add a doc from this one. And then I'm going to go back to here, and I'm going to add a playlist from this repository, and done, and boom. And then I can save that workspace playlist. This didn't need to be committed because it is just referencing documentation that's already there and is stored on the back end. While we're on the workspace menu, it's a good idea to point out how to invite the rest of your teammates to the workspace. And to do that, you just click the invite link here. And then you put in the email addresses, comma separated, the people that you want to invite, and we'll send an email to them with a link to this workspace and instructions on how to get in there. So we won't do that for real right now, but that's how you do it. You can see it's also part of the onboarding checklist that we have. So make sure that you invite your team. Now we've got a good overview of how to create documentation and find it within Swim. What's equally important is how to make sure that that documentation stays up to date and in sync with the code. For every repository that you have in your workspace, there's an integrations menu. And we will click that on this one, for example. And here we have a bunch of different settings that are configured per repository. The first one is making sure that Swim saves its contents to Markdown within a repository. We have that enabled. And then we have the most important part, which are the automatic CI integrations. Continuous integration is essential for continuous documentation. So we really need something that's looking at every pull request to make sure that the documentation matches the code. The easiest way to do this is to install our GitHub app if you're on GitHub, which pulls in our GitHub action, but also adds a lot of features around that by automatically formatting comments to let people know why the documentation broke, what they need to do in order to go fix it, and a bunch of other helpful things. So if you have GitHub, this is the easiest way to do it. If you aren't using GitHub, or you're using GitHub, but you don't want to, for some reason you can't use the app, we support everything from Bitbucket pipelines, Travis, GitLab, DevOps, CircleCI. All of the major ones are supported here, and it's easy to add support for more. Additionally, if your team isn't currently using continuous integration, you can use pre-commit, which is a set of hooks that intercept calls to Git and make custom things happen based on what you asked Git to do. For instance, you might want to run some checks before Git finishes a commit transaction, which is a common place to put linters and things like that, clear out extraneous spaces and other things like that. Swim's verification hooks can run on that too. There's a repository, GitHub repository, if you need to do that. Then finally, this is a great way to always locate the link to our IDE plugins. We have one for VS Code, and we have one for JetBrains IntelliJ, which is also the entire JetBrains family of IDEs, PyCharm and PHP and all the rest of them. So you can get those easy here. And these are also accessible within the marketplace of those IDEs respectively. Finally, let's talk about another really important part of the Swim process, which is making sure that documentation that you create and have kept up to date is actually discoverable and accessible to developers when they need it the most. The best way to do that for today's developers is to make it accessible directly within the IDE, as we showed you on the integrations menu. I'm using right now one of the JetBrains IDEs, but this could just as easily be VS Code. And you'll find that as you browse the source code, and here we have a blog post written in MDX, you'll see these little buoys, these little life rings. And what these do is they point out that there is a Swim doc associated with this somewhere because Swim has a record of a snippeter token here. So if I just click this, I open the documentation directly in my editor so that I don't have to go and log into the web app or do anything else. It's just right there for me when I need it, with all of the context of finding it as I was reading through the code and trying to understand the steps. And you could just as easily open this in a split pane view in order to read the docs on one side while you edit the code on the other, or whatever works best for you. Now we just have one thing left to do, which is to go ahead, and you'll notice that we're still on the initializing Swim branch in our Hello Swim repository. We need to go ahead and create a pull request to get all this stuff merged. So we're going to go ahead and click that, create the pull request, and I'm going to go ahead and merge it. And that's it. We're all up to date. Thank you for watching. If you have any other questions or need some help, head over to our community Slack channel. A link will be in the video description.